Chapter 7. Alright. The two men just stared at the door that slammed behind Gunny. That's the closest thing I've ever seen him come to being emotional, Jim said in disbelief. Well, first time for a lot of things in the last 2 days. What do you want to do now, bud? I need to run by the hardware store. And I wouldn't mind getting a little more ammo from the gun store, but with all this stuff in the trucks, I'm as nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. Let's go home. I'll feel a lot better when all this money is in the safe. Hey, do you think we should move my safe over to your house? If the power isn't back on in a couple days, then that's probably a good idea. We'll need a couple more guys to help put it in the truck, though. The two men got into their trucks and slowly worked their way out of the subdivision. When they approached the entrance to Silver Hills, it was almost 2 o'clock. Mark slowed his truck way down and stuck his hand out of the window to wave at the guards. They waved back, and he made the turn into the subdivision. John and Scott were on duty. Hey, John. Scott. John was holding an AR-15, and Scott had a scoped bolt-action hunting rifle slung over his shoulder. John also had a pistol in a military holster on his side. Hey, Mark, John returned. Are you going to pump water again today? I can. What time do you think is good for everyone? We're going to get together at my house after the vice president's speech again today just to discuss what's going on. How about right after that, just like last night, John suggested. Sounds good. See you at the meeting. Mark and Jim drove to the back of the subdivision and parked their trucks behind the house. The girls were on the deck under the awning. Lisa was going over some math with the twins, and Jess was reading a book. Samantha and David were nowhere to be seen. Jim, you got your truck running? Lisa shouted as he got out. Yes, ma'am, he answered. How did the meeting go? Jess asked as the men stepped onto the deck with the briefcases. Pretty good, Mark said with a big smile. Wouldn't you say it went pretty good, Jim? As a matter of fact, I would, Jim said with a huge smile of his own. You guys look like the cat that just swallowed the canary, Lisa said. What's up? Oh, just this, Jim stated as both men set the briefcases down and opened them for the women to see. Both women's mouths fell open. Where did you get that? Jess stammered. Todd gave it to us, Mark answered, as Jess reached out to touch the money like she wanted to make sure it was real. How much is it? Lisa inquired. It's this month's pay, Jim answered. What's with the rolls of coin? Jess wanted to know. That's a gift, Mark responded to even more quizzical looks on the wives' faces. You see, these are pre-1965 quarters. That means they're 90% silver. But I don't understand. Why would Todd pay you when you'll be back at work next week? He doesn't think we'll be back at work anytime soon, Mark said. Lisa shooed the twins away to go play, and the adults all sat down at the picnic table. Mark and Jim explained what they'd been told at the meeting and about the offer to stay at the ranch. Jess was a little skeptical, but Lisa didn't like it at all. The four of them debated the pros and cons of Todd's offer. After discussing it for a while, they agreed they had to at least go look at the groups set up at the ranch. But the women wanted to wait and see if the power would come back on first. They decided that if the lights weren't back on in the city by day after tomorrow at noon, they'd make their visit. They also discussed what to do with the money in case they decided to stay where they were. Lisa suggested that they each work on a list independently and compare them later. After all, it's not like we need to spend it if the lights come on, she said. Everyone agreed that this was a reasonable course of action. The men carried the cases into the study, and Mark opened his large gun safe. They put the cases on the top shelf of the safe and then carried in Jim's guns. The handguns all fit easily, but there wasn't room for all the long guns. They decided to remove some of the less expensive long guns and place them in a locking closet. Then they carried the food into the house and put Jim's ammo in the shed next to Mark's. Mark put Gunny's box of books in a cabinet in the shed. While they were doing that, Jess was warming up some soup and making grilled cheese sandwiches for the men. The gas stove would at least work until the propane ran out. Yeah. While Mark and Jim were eating, the women sat down with them, and they all discussed what might happen if the power didn't come back on pretty soon. They all agreed that things would get ugly. When it came to food, most people could get by for a week or maybe two without having to buy much. Some couldn't, but even they could probably borrow enough for a while. Then there was water. As soon as there wasn't enough water pressure in town for drinking and flushing, people would panic. None of them knew how long the city water board could keep pressure if the lights didn't come back on. The women thought maybe it would be a good idea to go ahead and buy some food if the grocery store was open. After all, they needed to eat whether they had lights or not, so the food wouldn't go to waste. And it might be too late if they waited. While they were talking about groceries, Mark remembered that Manny had promised him some eggs. He asked where David was so he could send him over to the Hernandez house, but was told that he was over at his friend's house. Sam, he learned, was in the camper listening to her MP3 player and generally feeling sorry for herself. Mark called her out of the camper to see what was wrong. It seemed that no one could be expected to live without a cell phone, especially a 16-year-old. Mark instructed her that people had lived for centuries without telephones and that they walked to other people's houses to visit. Just so that she could see how it was done, she could walk over to the Hernandez and get the eggs Manny had offered. "But, Dad, do I have to?" she whined. "Yes, you have to," Mark whined back in a sarcastic voice. "Now get going, and just be glad he's not giving us a side of beef." Samantha rolled her eyes at her father as her mother handed her an empty egg carton. She turned and walked off, slightly stomping her feet, knowing exactly how far she could push it and not get in trouble. That girl, Mark thought to himself. What does she always have to be so moody? Why does she always have to be so moody? Jess isn't like that. I wonder where she gets it from. If I had told David to go get the eggs, he would have just said, "Yes, sir," and been back in less time than I spent arguing with her. Mark sat down at the picnic table with the rest of the adults and listened to the news on the radio. The city of Cincinnati has been almost totally burned to the ground. Fire crews were unable to successfully battle the hundreds of fires set by the rioters, and the National Guard was not able to squash the riots in time to save the city. Most of the citizens were able to evacuate, many on foot, as burning cars blocked most of the streets in the city. However, it is estimated that 50 to 60,000 were trapped by the fires and unable to escape. The situation in Detroit is much the same. Over half the city has been lost. Fire crews are gallantly trying to save the area where most of the automotive plants are located. The mayor of Detroit asked the governor of Michigan to send National Guard troops in to put down the rioters and to seize firefighting equipment from other cities to help fight the fires in his city. The governor has called up the National Guard, but as of now, there is no word from the capital on seizing the property of other municipalities. The riots in Seattle were quieted quickly once the mayor of that city ordered police to shoot arsonists on sight. Police report over 400 arrests connected with the riots and 12 deaths. Fire crews in Seattle were helped by the rain that has been falling there since yesterday. Sources inside the Pentagon have hinted that the burst was the result of several nuclear explosions in space. Our CBS experts have theorized that such explosions would pose little or no risk of radioactive fallout to the United States, but would cause the kind of widespread system disruption we have seen. There was no word on who may have caused the explosion or how. It is rumored that in his speech to the nation tonight, the Vice President will confirm that the body of the President has been recovered and identified. In state news now, the Texas governor has called up all of the National Guard troops in the state. The governor is quoted as saying, "We need them ready just in case." In Houston, the once proud Exxon building was burned to the ground today. Fire crews in Houston, still busy fighting fires in residential areas, could spare only enough manpower to ensure that the fire did not spread to other buildings in the downtown area. Locally, the San Antonio Police Department is reporting a city record 23 murders last night. Most appear to be drug or gang related. However, a spokesman for the department said, with the communication interruptions, There may be more that we don't know about yet. The mayor has asked for all residents to stay in their homes after dark. The sunset curfew goes into effect at 8 p.m. today, 8:10 p.m. today. Now for the weather. It will be hot and dry today with highs reaching near 100 degrees. The low tonight will be in the mid-70s with a slight chance of rain after dark. For tomorrow, you can expect more of the same. This is KSTX 640 AM. We'll be back after this break. Mark turned off the radio. Thank God we don't live in Cincinnati, Lisa exclaimed. You can say that again, Jess agreed, as the men nodded their heads. Mark looked at Jim. You want to help me with that glow plug controller on my truck? Sure thing, buddy. Yes, you guys go play while Lisa and I work on a grocery list, Jess dictated. Yes, ma'am. Jim and Mark started working on the Ford. Mark noticed that Sam had come back and given the eggs to her mother, and then returned to the camper and probably her sulking. Just after they removed the old controller, Jim noticed it was time for the vice president's speech. Mark called Lisa and Jess to bring the radio over to the truck so he could keep working. The local newscast from earlier was correct. The president's body had been found. The VP said he had taken the oath of office, and as the new president, he would be submitting his nominee for vice president to the Congress as his first order of business. The new president asked for all Americans to pray for the country during these troubling times. He indicated that they were very close to restoring limited power to some of the major cities on the East Coast. He encouraged everyone to help and watch out for his or her neighbors, and he assured the country and the world that the United States would emerge from this crisis stronger and more resilient. He warned that those who would try to take advantage of the situation, both domestic and foreign, that punishment would be swift and sure. When the speech was over, Jess turned off the radio. No one said anything for a while. Let's all go down to John's and see what's going on, Mark suggested somberly. Good idea, Jess agreed. We'll get Sam to watch the girls for you, Lisa. The four of them walked to the corner where John's house was. Several of the men brought their wives this afternoon. Everyone milled around and met the neighbors that they didn't already know. The main subjects of interest were the former president's death and whether or not the new president was telling the truth about the power. Opinions were split. Generally, the women believed the president and the men did not. There were exceptions, of course, but not many. Mark and Jim talked it over and agreed that they should help stand watch at the gate. They spoke to John about taking a shift. What made you change your minds about needing guards? John asked. Oh, we still don't think it's really needed, but we want to do our fair share, Mark explained. I see, said John. Listen, I already have the schedule made up and posted for the next week. Could I use you two for alternates until I make the new schedule? And then work you into the rotation? That'd be fine with us, John. Before he left, Mark announced that he'd be running the water pump as soon as he got home. Once there, he and Jim moved the generator and plugged in the pump. Mark put Sam and David in charge from the start today. Back at the truck, they finished hooking up the new controller, and Mark climbed in to try it. The engine had cooled completely off, so this would be a good test. He turned the key on, and the wait to start light illuminated. After about 15 seconds, it went off, and Mark engaged the starter. The big diesel turned over, caught, and idled like a sewing machine. He turned the truck off, whispering a prayer of thanks. When everyone had gotten water, Mark and Jim moved the generator back by the campers. Mrs. Peterson had brought back the 5-gallon container, and David had refilled it and carried it back to her house. Mark plugged in the campers and the deep freeze. They wouldn't be able to waste the gas to run the ACs every day if the power didn't come back on, but Mark thought it was best to acclimate everyone slowly so they could use it for a week or two. He checked his freezer, and it wasn't as cold as he thought it should be. He may need to run the generator for a while each morning to keep everything frozen, at least until the weather cooled off some. He took out 4 fresh ice bottles and replaced the 4 in the ice chest. The food in the cooler was still cold. Then he put the 4 from last night back in the freezer. The bottles he took out of the ice chest were still frozen in the very center. It wouldn't take long to freeze them back solid. Mark heard Jess calling him. He walked back to the desk and saw the Risk game Mrs. Peterson had given them on the picnic table. They all sat down and played until almost 11 o'clock. When they were done, Mark went into the house and put $1 in the box for a word that had slipped out when he busted a knuckle working on the truck. Then he turned off the generator and went to the camper to go to bed. He tried to go to sleep, but his mind was racing. It was a long time before he finally dozed off. End of chapter 7. All right, that's it for the night. Good night.